Thomas Carter lived in a small, sleepy town nestled between wooded hills and forgotten highways. One of those places where people nodded at each other in passing, but rarely asked too many questions. He had become something of a fixture there, a quiet, polite man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a voice that still carried the warmth of a teacher, even though he had stopped teaching 3 years ago. Once a respected literature professor at the nearby college, Thomas had retired early, citing health reasons, though no one had ever seen him look ill. He now spent his days tending to his garden, reading old poetry, and walking his golden retriever, Bronte, through the misty trails that bordered his property. The townspeople admired him from a distance. He was well-read, well-mannered, and solitary. A man who seemed to have accepted life's hardships with quiet grace. They knew his story, or at least the version of it he had allowed to live. 10 years ago, his 16-year-old daughter, Lily, had run away from home. It had shocked everyone. She was bright, gifted, full of spirit, too full, some said. There had been whispers of a fight, something about a rebellious phase. But Thomas had done everything a grieving father should do, filed a missing person report, organized search parties, wept on local news. Eventually, when no trace of Lily was found, people stopped asking. She became one of those ghost stories small towns carry like shadows. Life moved on, except for Rebecca. Rebecca Carter, Thomas's ex-wife, had never moved on. After Lily's disappearance, their marriage began to dissolve. While Thomas accepted the runaway theory with an unsettling calm, Rebecca couldn't stop questioning. She dug through Lily's room, reread old journals, and begged the police to reopen the case multiple times. But there were no new leads, and eventually, even the law gave up. Heartbroken and exhausted, she left the town and moved to another city. But grief followed her. Every birthday, every anniversary, she lit a candle for the daughter she never stopped hoping to see again. In private moments, she admitted to herself that she wasn't just mourning Lily. She was haunted by the feeling that Thomas knew more than he ever let on. Thomas, meanwhile, carried his past like a man might carry a stone in his pocket. Out of sight, but never forgotten. His house was neat, almost obsessively so. Books were arranged in alphabetical order. Pictures were perfectly aligned, and not a single item was out of place. But the order was a mask. Beneath the surface, a quiet tension simmered. Some nights, when the wind howled through the trees and the creak of old floorboards echoed in the silence, Thomas would wake up drenched in sweat. He'd reach for the glass of whiskey on his nightstand and sit in the dark, staring at the shadows on the wall. He never spoke her name out loud, not to anyone, not even Bronte. There were no pictures of Lily in the house anymore, not a single framed photo or forgotten school portrait. If someone asked, Thomas would say it was too painful, that he preferred to remember her in his mind. But the truth was more complicated. The house, much like Thomas himself, had been scrubbed clean of her presence. Every trace of her had been deliberately erased. Still, the past had a way of lingering. Each year, around the time of her disappearance, Thomas noticed small signs. A letter in the mail with no return address. A single daisy left on his porch. Once, a teenage girl with Lily's eyes had passed him in the grocery store, and he'd felt his knees buckle before realizing it was just a trick of memory. He dismissed these moments as coincidence. After all, he had buried Lily. He knew that, just as surely as he knew she would never come back. Or so he thought, because in the quiet rhythm of his life, in the polished calm of his days, something was beginning to stir, something long buried, long silenced. The past had remained patient for 10 years, but it was done waiting. The rain had been falling all afternoon, turning the earth into a thick sludge and darkening the sky to a nearly charcoal gray. Thunder grumbled in the distance like an old god waking from slumber, and the wind howled through the trees that surrounded Thomas Carter's home. He stood by the fireplace, a worn book of Tennyson's poems resting in one hand, a half-empty glass of whiskey in the other. Bronte lay curled at his feet, occasionally lifting her head at the cracks of thunder. It was the kind of night no one went out unless they had to, which is why the knock at the door startled him. It was soft at first, barely a tap, but it echoed through the quiet house like a cannon blast. Thomas froze, his breath catching in his throat. He looked at the clock. 8:47 p.m., too late for a visitor. He placed the glass down on the side table and set the book aside. Bronte perked up now, her ears twitching. The knock came again, louder this time. Thomas moved to the door slowly, instinctively tightening the belt of his cardigan. A flicker of unease curled in his gut, one he couldn't explain. Peering through the peephole, all he saw was the rain pouring in sheets across the porch. Whoever was knocking stood just out of view. He unlocked the door and opened it halfway, and then the world stopped. Standing just beyond the threshold, soaked to the bone but eerily calm, was a young woman in her mid-20s. Her clothes clung to her skin. Her hair was darker and longer than he remembered, and her features were sharper, matured by time. But her eyes were unmistakable. Those eyes had haunted his dreams for a decade. "Lily," he whispered, his voice almost cracking. She stepped forward into the doorway, the light from inside casting a halo around her drenched form. Her expression was unreadable. No joy, no rage. Just a quiet, knowing stare. "You thought I was dead, didn't you?" she said. Thomas's hand trembled on the doorknob, but he didn't let it show. He forced a swallow down his dry throat and opened the door wider, stepping aside. Coming out of the rain, he murmured, trying to gather himself. She walked in slowly, dripping water onto the hardwood floor. Bronte whined softly and took a hesitant step toward her, then stopped, sensing the strange energy in the room. Thomas shut the door behind her and turned, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear the rain anymore. He studied her, scanning every inch of her face as if he could find a crack, a clue, a reason, something to explain this impossible moment. "I don't understand," he finally said. "How?" Lily didn't move to sit. She didn't offer hugs or questions or tears. She simply looked him dead in the eyes and said, "I remember everything." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. His knees weakened, and he gripped the back of the nearest chair to steady himself. That voice, it wasn't the voice of a lost child. It was the voice of someone who had been to hell and clawed her way back. "Lily, listen, whatever you think you remember, it's been a long time. You've been through something traumatic," he began, his words cautious, calculated. She raised her hand, cutting him off. "Don't gaslight me, Dad. Not again." Her voice was calm, but the storm outside now sounded quieter than the silence that followed. Thomas felt as if the air had thickened around him. 1,000 thoughts flooded his mind. Panic, denial, confusion. Had someone found her? Had she faked it all these years? How much did she actually know? "Why now?" he asked finally. "Why come back after all this time?" She looked around the house, the same house where she had grown up, the same place he thought he had buried the truth. "I've had time," she said simply. "Time to heal, time to remember, and time to prepare." Thomas stared at her, unable to speak, unable to breathe. Lily stepped closer, her voice a whisper now. "You've buried me once, Dad, but this time I'm burying the lie." And just like that, the storm outside didn't seem so loud anymore, because the real one had just walked through his door. As the storm howled outside Thomas Carter's home, the silence between him and his resurrected daughter thickened like fog. Lily hadn't said much since walking in. She had only said enough. Just enough to awaken a graveyard of memories Thomas had spent 10 years trying to keep buried. And now, as the fire crackled weakly in the hearth and shadows danced across the walls, his mind began to drift back to that night. The night everything changed. It had been autumn then, the leaves turning shades of blood and gold. Lily was 16, sharp-tongued, restless, and entirely too perceptive for her age. Thomas remembered how she had grown distant in those final weeks, how she had started looking at him differently, as if she was searching for something behind his smile. The truth was Lily had always been curious, always digging through drawers, notebooks, bookshelves, anything that might feed her growing awareness of the world. And one afternoon, while Thomas was at a faculty meeting, she found something she was never meant to see. It started with a letter, folded neatly inside a worn copy of the picture of Dorian Gray, of all places. A letter addressed to Thomas from a man named Adrian. "My love," it began, I dream of the day we won't have to hide anymore. Lily read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling. Beneath the letter were old photographs. Thomas and Adrian at a cabin near the lake, smiles wide and unguarded, hands touching in a way no friends touched. There were more messages, emails printed and folded, ticket stubs from cities he had claimed he visited for conferences. It didn't take long for Lily to piece it together. Her father, the respected professor and doting husband, had been living a lie. She was hurt, not because her father was gay. Lily didn't care about that. What cut deep was the betrayal, the secrecy, the lies he had spun to her and her mother for years. And in that moment, something snapped inside her. A teenage heart full of righteous fury decided she couldn't stay silent. That night, she confronted him. Thomas had just finished grading papers when she stormed into his study, her hands shaking with the evidence. "You lied to us," she spat, slamming the letter and photos onto his desk. "How long, Dad? How long have you been hiding this?" He stared at the papers, his face pale, all color draining like ink and water. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily's voice rose. "Don't you dare pretend this isn't real. You cheated on Mom. You lied to me. And you've been doing it for years." Thomas tried to calm her. "Lily, it's complicated. You don't understand." "Oh, I do understand. I understand you're a coward. And I'm going to tell Mom." That sentence rang in his ears like a siren. Fear surged through him, raw, uncontrollable fear. Not fear of his daughter, but fear of exposure. Of losing the life he had carefully constructed. His career, his reputation. Everything would crumble if this got out. He stood too quickly, knocking his chair backward. "Lily, wait, please," he said, reaching for her arm. She yanked it away. "Don't touch me," she screamed, tears mixing with rage in her eyes. What happened next never left his mind. In the panic, in the heat of the moment, Thomas reached to stop her from storming out. He grabbed her shoulder too hard. She shoved him. He reacted, more instinct than intention, and pushed back. Her foot caught the edge of the rug. Her body twisted, and with a sickening crack, her head struck the corner of the oak table. She crumpled instantly, motionless. Thomas stood over her, gasping, the room spinning. "Lily," he whispered, kneeling down. He shook her gently. No response. He checked her pulse with trembling fingers. Nothing. Her eyes were open, but glassy, lifeless. Time collapsed. In the hours that followed, Thomas worked like a machine. He drove her body deep into the woods behind their property, the place she used to play as a child. He dug through the wet soil until his hands bled and buried her there. No grave marker, no cross, just earth. Then he returned home, sat at her desk, and wrote a fake runaway note in her handwriting. "I'm sorry. I can't live like this anymore. I need to go find myself. Please don't look for me. Lily." The next morning, he called the police, his voice perfectly rehearsed. His daughter had run away, he said. Just another troubled teen, lost to the world. And the world believed him. For 10 years, they all believed him. Until tonight, when she knocked on his door, alive, watching, and remembering everything. The morning after Thomas buried his daughter, the world carried on as if nothing had changed. The sun rose over the hills. Birds sang. Neighbors walked their dogs. And Thomas Carter dialed the police with the steady calm of a man who had rehearsed his lines 1,000 times in the mirror. "Yes," he said, voice shaking just the right amount. "It's my daughter, Lily Carter. She's gone. I think she ran away." The officer on the other end asked for details. Thomas supplied them in a measured tone, laced with just enough confusion and pain to sound authentic. He told them she'd been distant, emotional, that she left behind a note. He read it to them, even paused to choke back false tears. He claimed to have found it on her desk that morning, along with her missing backpack and the absence of her presence. The officer assured him they'd send someone immediately, and they did. Soon his house was filled with uniforms, clipboards, and soft-voiced sympathy. They asked questions. Thomas had answers. They searched Lily's room, neat, undisturbed except for the missing clothes he had carefully selected himself the night before. They took the note. They asked Rebecca to come. When she arrived, she was frantic, disheveled, her eyes puffy from the drive and already swollen with dread. As soon as she saw Thomas, she broke down in his arms, sobbing into his chest like she used to when they were still in love. "What do you mean she's gone?" she cried. "She wouldn't just leave." Thomas, eyes rimmed red, held her tightly. "She's been struggling, Rebecca. You know that. She's sensitive, emotional. Maybe something pushed her too far." Rebecca pulled back, her expression flickering. "She would have told me. She tells me everything." The crack appeared then. Small, almost imperceptible, but it would grow over time. The investigation gained momentum quickly in the first few days. Flyers were printed, canvasses conducted. Officers combed the surrounding woods, though they never dug deep enough. Thomas participated in it all, always front and center, always the picture of a devastated father holding out hope. He cried in front of news cameras, begged for her return, hugged volunteers. But behind closed doors, when the house was still and the media was gone, he sat in his study with a whiskey bottle and the weight of his silence pressing into his chest. Rebecca, however, couldn't rest. She called Lily's friends. She went through her social media. She noticed strange things, the way Lily had acted that week. Restless, angry, like something had been gnawing at her from inside. She asked Thomas about it. "She was probably just being a teenager," he told her gently. "It's not your fault. It's not mine either." But Rebecca couldn't accept that. In the weeks that followed, her suspicion grew, not in the way of someone who knew what happened, but the way someone feels when their gut tells them the world is lying. And worse, that the lie is coming from someone they trust. She pressed the police to dig deeper, to consider the possibility that Lily hadn't just run away. But without a body, without evidence of foul play, they had nothing to pursue. The runaway note, though not definitive, was enough to shift their focus. Over time, the case grew cold. The flyers faded from telephone poles. The community moved on. But Rebecca didn't. Neither did Thomas. Only he buried his grief in guilt and silence, while she buried hers in obsession and pain. Their marriage, already frayed before Lily's disappearance, unraveled completely in the following year. Arguments turned into isolation, silence into departure. Eventually, Rebecca moved away, back to her sisters in another city, clinging to therapy and prayer while Thomas stayed behind in the house where it all happened. The house with Lily's room still locked. The house with the stained shovel he never threw away. The house where the perfect lie had taken root. Neighbors pitied him. Colleagues respected him. No one suspected him. Thomas Carter, the grieving father, the literary mind crushed by personal tragedy. It was a performance so seamless, so perfectly executed, that even he started to believe it sometimes, until quiet moments at night reminded him of what lay under the soil. Until now, when the lie came back to his doorstep, drenched in rain and holding his stare with the same eyes he thought he'd buried 10 years ago. Darkness surrounded her. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was the absence of being, of self, of memory. Lily's mind floated in a void as her body lay cold and broken beneath the canopy of trees. The wound on her head throbbed with every heartbeat, and her chest rose and fell so faintly. It was a miracle she breathed at all. It had been hours since Thomas buried her, convinced she was gone. Hours during which the damp soil above her shifted, slightly, from the movement of a body not entirely dead. A trembling hand had eventually surfaced, barely, and by chance or fate, someone saw it. That someone was June. June Holloway lived on the edge of those woods, tucked away in a weathered cabin obscured by years of overgrown ivy and solitude. Once a nurse, June had retreated from the world after losing her husband and son in a car crash a decade earlier. Since then, she'd found comfort in the quiet, caring for wild animals, gardening, and pretending she no longer missed humanity. But on that early autumn morning, while searching for her missing cat near the forest edge, June spotted the flash of something pale, Lily's hand, barely visible through disturbed earth and fallen leaves. At first, she thought it was an animal, but when she uncovered more, horror struck. A young girl, barely alive, her pulse thready, her breathing shallow, her face bloodied and bruised. June didn't call the police. Some instinct told her this wasn't a case for authorities. Maybe it was the look of desperation clinging to the girl's face, or maybe it was the mother in her, the part that still ached for the child she'd lost. She lifted Lily's limp body into her arms, took her home, and began to work. For days, Lily drifted in and out of consciousness, fevered, silent. June kept her warm, cleaned her wounds, and fed her broth one spoon at a time. She dressed the gash on her forehead with care. No questions, no pressure, just patience. It wasn't until weeks later that Lily woke properly. Her eyes opened and stayed open. Her lips parted, dry and unsure. But when June asked her name, she didn't know what to say, because she couldn't remember. Not fully. Not yet. The trauma had buried her memories deep, just like the earth had tried to bury her body. Flashes came in dreams. A man yelling, a struggle, a sharp pain, the scent of moss, the sound of dirt being shoveled, but no clear image, no full name, just fragments. June called her Mara. It meant bitter in Hebrew, and there was bitterness in the girl's silence. But it was also a new beginning. June taught her how to cook, how to trap rabbits, how to read poetry from tattered books. She homeschooled her slowly, helped her learn to speak again without fear. Over the years, Lily, now Mara, grew stronger, sharper. She no longer asked why she couldn't leave. She understood the world outside was dangerous. And in her gut, she knew something terrible had happened. The memories came back slowly, piece by piece, like frost melting off glass. On her 12th birthday, she remembered her name was Lily. A few months later, she remembered her father's face and the rage in it. By the time she turned 17, she remembered everything. The confrontation, the push, the pain, the betrayal. But still she stayed. She stayed because the world had moved on without her. Because her father thought she was dead. Because her mother had stopped looking. And because she wasn't ready, not yet. June never asked for details. She only held Lily when the nightmares came. She made Lily feel safe, and in return, Lily gave her company, love, a sense of purpose again. Then, one bitter winter, June died in her sleep. Peacefully. No struggle. Just stillness. Lily buried her in the woods they both loved, beneath a crooked oak, alone. And as she stood over June's grave, wind howling through the trees, she made a decision. It was time. Time to stop hiding. Time to confront the man who tried to erase her. Time to return, not as the scared girl he thought he killed, but as the woman who remembered everything. And so she left the woods, returned to the town where her name had become a sad story, knocked on the door of the man who had played the perfect lie, and said, "You thought I was dead, didn't you?" The night after her return, Lily didn't sleep. She sat at the edge of the motel bed, legs pulled to her chest, eyes locked on the rain-slicked window, watching the town lights flicker like old ghosts. The knock on her father's door had been only the beginning, one tremor before the quake. Now came the part that would unravel everything. The truth, her revenge, and his destruction. Thomas hadn't called her since that night. Not once. He was trying to pretend it hadn't happened. But she knew better. He was a man of control, a man of routines, and she had just shattered both. That meant he was plotting, calculating, trying to reclaim the upper hand. But she was ready. She hadn't come back impulsively. She had planned this down to the breath. The first thing she did was find her mother. Rebecca Carter now lived in a modest apartment a few towns over, teaching part-time at a community college. She had aged, but not gracefully. Grief had carved its toll into her features. Her smile lines had been replaced with permanent worry creases. Her once blonde hair was now streaked with gray, tied back tightly as if trying to contain everything falling apart. When Rebecca opened the door and saw Lily standing there, alive, older, changed, she didn't scream. She didn't faint. She just stood frozen, her breath caught halfway between joy and horror. "Mom," Lily said softly. Rebecca's hand shot to her mouth. Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself on the doorframe. "Is it really?" Her voice broke. They didn't speak much at first. They just held each other, years of sorrow collapsing into that single, silent embrace. But as the shock wore off and the initial tears dried, Rebecca began asking questions. and Lily answered them all. Every memory, every flashback, every bruise and moment of confusion. The truth about Thomas, about Adrian, about what happened the night she ran away. Rebecca was shattered. She kept whispering, "No, not him, not like that," as if trying to rewrite history in her mind. But the more she heard, the more the pieces clicked into place. The strange way Thomas had acted, the tension in their final months, the convenient note that didn't sound like her daughter. And then the gut feeling she had always ignored. He was hiding something. Lily didn't ask her mother to do anything. She just left her with the truth and the choice to believe it. Then she went to work. She met with Thomas several times after that, always in public places, quiet cafes, parks, the university library, anywhere he couldn't lose control. She played the role of the wounded but forgiving daughter, pretending she wanted understanding more than justice. He, desperate to keep the peace, went along with it. He listened, offered apologies laced with half-truths, tried to frame it as a terrible accident. But Lily wasn't there for apologies. She was there for evidence. She recorded every conversation, hidden mic clipped beneath her collar. She coaxed him gently, reminding him of that night, triggering his guilt. Slowly, he spoke more freely. He never outright said, "I buried you," but he said enough. How scared he was. How he didn't know what else to do. How he panicked. How no one could ever understand what it would have done to his career, his reputation, if people knew. When she didn't seem satisfied, Thomas changed tactics. He offered her money. "I can set you up. You don't have to struggle," he said, sliding an envelope across a cafe table. When she didn't reach for it, he got nervous. "You're confused," he said next. "Trauma does that. You probably remember it wrong. We both said things that night." She smiled. "Sure we did. But only one of us buried the other." Gaslighting didn't work. Neither did bribery. And now his panic was growing. That's when she started sending the emails. Anonymous, encrypted, and deliberate. One to the local police station. One to the missing persons division. She didn't tell the full story, just offered puzzle pieces. A tip about a case closed too soon. A quote from one of Thomas's conversations. A claim that Lily Carter never ran away. And in each, a breadcrumb left hanging, enough to warrant interest, but not enough to point back to her yet. She didn't need them to act right away. She just needed them to wonder, to dig, to start looking at the man who had always played the grieving father a little too perfectly. And as the tension mounted around Thomas Carter like a tightening noose, Lily watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. The storm she had started wasn't just coming. It was already here. The first time Detective Marissa Hale saw the anonymous email, she almost deleted it. It was a quiet Saturday morning, and retirement had made her mornings slower, filled with gardening books and black coffee rather than crime reports. But something about the subject line, regarding the Lily Carter case, 2009, froze her hand above the delete key. The name stirred a long-buried ache, a case that had never sat right with her, no matter how neat it looked on paper. She clicked it open. There were no pleasantries, no names, just a brief note. Lily Carter didn't run away. Thomas Carter isn't who you think he is. I remember everything. Attached were 2 audio clips, heavily compressed but still decipherable. Her old instincts flared back to life. She listened. The voice was unmistakable. Thomas Carter, confessing, not directly, but enough to make the hair on her arms stand up. And the other voice, older, wiser, but familiar. Could it be Lily? Marissa leaned back in her chair, the worn grooves of her desk creaking beneath her. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from adrenaline. After 10 years, someone had just tossed a match into the dry forest of her memory. She didn't tell anyone, not yet. She started by digging through her own boxes, dusty files packed away in her garage. She found the original Carter case folder, still marked presumed runaway. She remembered the father's face, stoic, measured, almost rehearsed. She remembered the lack of evidence, the too perfect note, and the mother who had been quietly falling apart. This time, Marissa wouldn't let it go. Across town, things weren't as quiet for Thomas Carter. His carefully curated world was starting to crumble, and he could feel it. First, Rebecca called. Her voice wasn't sad or pleading anymore. It was sharp, cold, and venomous. "I spoke to Lily," she said. "She's alive. And I've heard everything." Thomas's mouth went dry. "Rebecca, you don't understand what happened." She's confused. This is trauma speaking. "I recorded everything you said," she snapped. "And the police will have it by morning." Click. That same day, Rebecca drove straight to the local precinct with the files on a flash drive. She sat across from a young officer, eyes bloodshot, voice trembling only slightly as she handed over the evidence. "I know this sounds insane," she said, "but you're going to listen. My daughter was murdered, and she lived to tell me." The recordings spoke louder than her emotions. The officer promised to escalate the matter immediately, though part of him still thought it was a hoax. Still, protocol was protocol, and within hours, the rumors began leaking from desk to desk. Then the media caught wind. A local crime blog published a cryptic article. "Missing girl returns after 10 years?" Anonymous source claims shocking twist in Carter case. The article hinted at foul play, at secrets, at a father with too much to lose. They didn't name names, but it was enough. By evening, local news vans were circling the quiet suburb like vultures. Students at the university whispered in the halls about Thomas. A few even pulled out their phones to record him during lectures, hoping to catch a reaction. He started canceling classes, then stopped leaving the house altogether. Inside the house where he had once buried his truth, Thomas Carter was unraveling. He began unplugging phones, boarding up windows, and pacing the floor like a hunted man. He avoided mirrors. He barely ate. Every creak in the floorboards, every ring of his doorbell, sent him into a spiral of panic. He called Adrian once, his former lover, the one he had abandoned to protect his image all those years ago. "I need help," Thomas whispered. "They know. She's alive." Adrian hung up without saying a word. Now, completely isolated, Thomas began talking to himself, rewriting history aloud, telling himself it had been an accident, that Lily was cruel, that she had forced his hand, that she was ruining everything again. But even as he clung to those lies, the shadows around him were growing louder. The whispers weren't just in his head anymore. The truth was coming, and this time it had a voice. The video went live at 8:07 p.m. It was raw, unpolished, and painfully real. Lily sat in front of a simple gray wall, her face illuminated by a single lamp. Her voice didn't tremble. Her eyes didn't look away. She spoke with the calm fury of someone who had been silent too long. "My name is Lily Carter. 10 years ago, the world thought I ran away. I didn't. My father tried to kill me because I discovered the truth. He was hiding a secret he couldn't bear to let anyone know." She paused, letting the words settle. "I found letters, messages. He was in love with a man named Adrian. He was gay, and he thought that secret would destroy him. I told him I was going to tell my mom. I didn't know how dangerous the truth could be. We fought. He pushed me. My head hit the fireplace. I blacked out. When I woke up, I was buried alive." She explained how she clawed her way out in the middle of the night, bleeding and broken, and wandered into the woods. How June, a stranger with demons of her own, found her and took her in. How she stayed hidden out of fear, confusion, trauma. And how, piece by piece, the memories returned. "But I remember everything now," she said, eyes hardening. "And so will the world." Within hours, the video spread like wildfire. Twitter, TikTok, news sites, podcasts. Everyone was talking about it. The daughter who came back from the grave. Hashtags trended globally. Comment sections exploded with theories, outrage, sympathy, and disbelief. But what made it undeniable was the final 10 seconds of the video, where Lily played her father's recorded voice. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Lily. You weren't supposed to come back." The media swarmed Thomas Carter's neighborhood by dawn. News vans lined the sidewalks. Drones flew overhead. Students at the university protested outside his building, holding up signs that read "Justice for Lily" and "The mask has fallen." Meanwhile, local police reopened the long cold case with renewed intensity. Detective Marissa Hale, no longer retired, now consulting, led the team back to the woods behind Thomas's house. The earth was disturbed, just as Lily had described. Cadaver dogs sniffed. Shovels pierced the ground. After hours of digging, they unearthed what remained of the makeshift grave. Bones. Fragments of the dress Lily had been wearing. A rusted necklace she had described in her video. It was all there. By afternoon, a warrant was signed. Officers approached the Carter residence cautiously, though the man inside posed no physical threat. Still, they found Thomas pacing the living room, surrounded by torn papers and shattered glass. A man undone. When they knocked, he opened the door without a word. "Thomas Carter," an officer announced, "you're under arrest for the attempted murder of your daughter, Lily Carter." The cameras caught every second of it. The handcuffs, the silence, the way his eyes darted to the swarm of journalists shouting his name. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just looked up at the gray sky, defeated. From across the street, Rebecca watched from her car. She didn't get out. She didn't wave. She simply stared, her face expressionless. Rage and vindication danced quietly behind her eyes. 10 years of nightmares, unanswered questions, and hollow apologies had led to this moment. She had once loved that man, had once trusted him with her child. Now he was being taken away for trying to bury them both. Lily, standing beside her, reached over and gripped her mother's hand tightly. "It's over," she whispered. Rebecca didn't respond, but she didn't let go either. And for the first time in a decade, the truth was louder than the lie. The courthouse was quieter than expected. No protesters, no reporters shouting questions. Just a gray sky hanging heavy over the city and the soft shuffle of footsteps on cold marble floors. Inside, the trial was already underway. No jury, no drawn-out drama. Just the final chapter of a secret too dark to stay buried. Lily stood outside the courtroom doors in a navy coat, her hair tied back, face expressionless. She hadn't dressed to be noticed. In fact, she had no intention of going inside at all. Not today. Not anymore. Thomas Carter sat before the judge, looking smaller than anyone remembered him. Gone was the confident professor, the well-spoken intellectual with 1,000 accolades. In his place was a broken man, his shoulders hunched with shame. He didn't look at anyone. Not his lawyer, not the judge, not the few former colleagues who'd quietly slipped in to watch. When asked how he pled to the charges of involuntary manslaughter and obstruction of justice, Thomas spoke for the first time in hours. "Guilty," he said quietly, "to both counts." The courtroom remained still. No gasps, no applause, just a sense of finality. He didn't explain, didn't offer an apology. Maybe he knew there were no words left that could make a difference. The truth was already out there, in Lily's voice, in her video, in the public's collective outrage. Outside, Lily stood motionless, listening through the heavy doors. She had been asked to testify, even encouraged by her attorney to deliver a statement. But she declined. "What's the point?" she had said. "I've already told the world. I don't need to say it again in a room where he already knows what he did." Instead, she waited for the verdict. The sentence would be announced in a few days, but it didn't matter to her. He would live the rest of his life known for what he truly was. Not a scholar, not a father, but a man who killed his daughter to protect a lie. Later that afternoon, Lily visited her mother for the last time. Rebecca's apartment was warm, cluttered, filled with old memories and newer ones trying to be born. They sat at the kitchen table over tea, the silence more comfortable now than it had ever been before. Rebecca reached out and held her daughter's hand. "You could stay. We could try again." Lily smiled softly, but her eyes gave away the answer. "I need to go. I need something that isn't built on what happened." Rebecca nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Promise me you'll be okay?" "I already am," Lily said. They hugged one last time, long and tight. The kind of hug you give when you're both letting go and holding on at the same time. By dusk, Lily was gone. She walked through the city with a quiet purpose. No destination anyone knew. Just a small bag over her shoulder and a freedom that had taken a decade to reclaim. The streets blurred around her. Honking cars, passing strangers, neon lights flickering to life. She didn't look back. As she crossed a bridge into the next part of her journey, her voice narrated in the background, calm and clear. "He buried me once, but I came back to bury the lie. And this time, I don't need anyone to believe me. I just need to live.